The United States has over 330 million people spread across 50 states, and most of them genuinely believe the most dangerous thing they'll ever face is a car accident or a bad storm. They're wrong. Because somewhere in the Arizona desert, there's a scorpion thin enough to slide under your door and climb your bedroom ceiling in the dark. In the rivers of Mississippi, there's a creature that's been waiting on the bottom since before the dinosaurs disappeared, and its jaws work like a guillotine. In the swamps of Florida, something with a 3,000 psi bite force is watching the edge of your backyard pool. And in Alaska, the largest land predator on the planet doesn't run from humans. It walks toward them. From the spider hiding inside your winter boots to the half-ton bear that can outrun a horse. America is home to some of the most extraordinary and terrifying animals on Earth. And tonight, we're going through every single one of them. But first, before we get into it, drop a comment and let me know. What time is it where you are right now, and where are you watching from? Brown recluse spider, 6 eyes. That's how you tell it apart. Almost every spider on the planet has 8. The brown recluse, Loxosceles reclusa, has 6, arranged in 3 pairs, forming a tiny semicircle on its head. It's one of the only identification tricks that actually works, because everything else about this spider is designed to disappear. It's small, about the size of a quarter with its legs spread. It's brown, not a memorable brown, not a pattern you'd notice, just brown. The kind of brown that blends into cardboard boxes, old boots, stacked firewood, and the back corners of closets no one opens for months. And that's the whole point. The recluse doesn't want to be found. It doesn't build dramatic webs across doorways. It builds flat, irregular sheets of silk in places humans forget exist. Basements, attics, storage rooms, the gap behind a dresser that hasn't been moved since you bought the house. And here's where it earns its spot on this list. The bite is painless. Genuinely painless. Not mild discomfort, painless. People report feeling nothing at all. Maybe a tiny pinch like brushing against a thorn. Most victims don't realize they've been bitten for hours. Sometimes a full day passes before anything happens. And then something happens. The venom of the brown recluse contains an enzyme called sphingomyelinase D, one of the rarest compounds in the animal world. What it does is simple to describe and horrifying to witness. It destroys the membranes of your cells. Not the muscle, not the bone. The walls of the cells themselves. The blood vessels around the bite lose their structural integrity. Oxygen stops reaching the surrounding tissue, and the skin begins to undergo what doctors call necrotic arachnidism. In plain terms, the flesh around the bite starts to break down. It darkens, it opens, and it keeps opening for days, sometimes weeks, because the enzyme doesn't stop working. A single bite smaller than a pinhead can create a wound the size of a fist, deep enough to expose muscle and bone, requiring skin grafts and months of reconstructive treatment. A woman in Missouri put on a pair of winter boots she'd kept in the closet since last season. A recluse had been living in the toe of the boot. She felt a light sting on her heel. 48 hours later, a dark purple blister had formed. When it ruptured, it revealed a crater of tissue that was already gone, and the edges were still expanding. She spent weeks in a hospital and needed multiple surgeries just to walk again. There is no anti-venom for the brown recluse in the United States. Treatment is wound management and damage control, and hoping the enzyme runs its course before it reaches anything critical. And maybe the most unsettling fact of all, this spider can survive for over 6 months without a single drop of water or food. It just sits, in the dark, in a box you forgot about, waiting for nothing in particular. One more thing, it's not rare. The brown recluse is found across at least 15 states in the central and southern U.S. There are houses in Missouri, Kansas, and Oklahoma that have been found to contain over 1,000 of them living behind the walls. You'd never know. Arizona bark scorpion, 7 centimeters. That's the full body length of the most medically significant scorpion in the United States. The Arizona bark scorpion, Centroroides sculpturatus, weighs about the same as a sheet of paper. Its body is pale, almost translucent, the kind of sandy yellow that vanishes against drywall, tile grout, and the fabric of your bed sheets. And unlike every other scorpion in North America, this one climbs walls, ceilings, smooth surfaces that should be impossible for something with 8 legs and a tail. The bark scorpion does it effortlessly. It can flatten its body to the thickness of a credit card and slide through gaps under doors, around window seals, and into the folds of clothing left on the floor overnight. This is why it's responsible for thousands of hospital visits every year across Arizona and the Sonoran Desert region. Not because it's aggressive, it's not, but because it lives exactly where people live. It ends up inside boots, under pillows, between stacked towels. And when skin touches it by accident, it stings. What happens next separates this scorpion from every other arachnid in America. The venom is purely neurotoxic. It targets the sodium channels in your nerve cells and forces them open, permanently. Your nerves start firing signals at random, non-stop, with no input from your brain. The sensation begins as a tingling in the area around the sting. Within minutes, it escalates into something victims describe as continuous electric shocks traveling up the entire limb. Your muscles start to twitch on their own. Your eyes lose the ability to focus and begin moving involuntarily. Saliva floods your mouth because the glands are being activated by signals that don't exist. For a healthy adult, this is agonizing but survivable. For a small child, it used to be a different story. Before the specific anti-venom, Anuscorp, was developed, this scorpion was responsible for dozens of pediatric cases in Arizona alone. The smaller the body, the faster the nervous system collapses. And now, the part that earns it a permanent place in the imagination. Take a UV flashlight, a cheap black light, the kind you'd buy at a party store, and point it at the ground outside your house in the Sonoran Desert at night. The Arizona bark scorpion glows, a bright, ghostly blue-green neon like something out of a science fiction movie. The chemical compounds in its exoskeleton, beta-carboline and 4-methylcoumarin, react to ultraviolet light in a way that scientists still don't fully understand. Some researchers think it's a form of UV detection. Others think it might function as a light-based lure for insects. No one knows for sure. What they do know is this. On a warm night in Phoenix or Tucson, one UV sweep of an average backyard can reveal dozens of them glowing in the dark. On rocks, on fences, on the outer walls of the house. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about the bark scorpion isn't its venom or its glow. It's who hunts it. The southern grasshopper mouse, Onychomus torridus, a tiny, round-eared rodent that weighs less than a golf ball, has evolved a complete genetic immunity to the scorpion's neurotoxin. The same venom that short-circuits a human nervous system functions as a painkiller in the mouse's body. It runs straight at the scorpion, takes the sting to the face without flinching, bites the stinger off, and eats the scorpion alive, starting from the head. And when it's done, it stands on its hind legs, points its nose at the sky, and howls like a wolf. A tiny, furry desert wolf that just defeated one of the most venomous creatures on the continent. Oh, and one more thing. This scorpion can survive being frozen solid overnight in winter desert temperatures and walk away completely fine the moment the morning sun thaws it out. Southern black widow, the red hourglass. If there's one marking in the entire animal kingdom that every American recognizes on instinct, it's that one. A small, glossy black spider with a perfect red hourglass on the underside of its abdomen. It's the universal symbol of do not touch, and there's a reason it's earned that status across the entire continent. The southern black widow, Latrodectus mactans, is found in every state in the southern half of the country and a significant portion of the north. It lives in dark, undisturbed places, Wood piles, garages, outdoor sheds, the undersides of patio furniture, and the corners of spaces that don't get cleaned often. It's not an aggressive spider. It doesn't chase, it doesn't jump, and it will generally retreat if given the option. But when it bites, the chemistry is staggering. Drop for drop, the venom of the black widow is 15 times more potent than that of a western diamondback rattlesnake. A quantity of venom smaller than a grain of refined salt is enough to send a 90-kilogram man into severe muscle spasms. The active compound is called alpha-latrotoxin, and it does something elegant and terrible. It forces every nerve ending near the bite to dump its entire supply of neurotransmitters at once. Acetylcholine, norepinephrine, everything fires simultaneously. The result is a condition called latrodectism, and it's unlike anything else in American medicine. The bite itself barely hurts. A small pinch, a red dot, nothing alarming, but somewhere between 30 minutes and an hour later, the wave hits. Deep, intense cramping radiates outward from the bite. Not surface pain, but something that feels internal, like your core muscles are being squeezed from the inside. The abdomen locks up so tight that doctors in emergency rooms have historically mistaken black widow envenomation for appendicitis. The chest tightens, blood pressure spikes, and the pain keeps climbing for hours. More than 2,500 bites are reported every year in the United States. Fatalities are extremely rare now thanks to modern treatment. But the experience itself is described by survivors as one of the most intense physical ordeals of their lives. And here's where history adds a layer you might not expect. Before indoor plumbing became standard across rural America, outhouses were everywhere. Dark, wooden, undisturbed structures sitting over pits, the perfect habitat for black widows. The spiders colonized them in enormous numbers, and the bites happened exactly where you'd expect, on exposed skin, in the most vulnerable and sensitive areas of the body, while people were sitting down and completely unaware. Hospital records from the early 20th century are full of these cases. Men arriving in extreme abdominal distress, unable to explain what happened, getting prepped for emergency surgery before someone noticed the 2 tiny puncture marks. Now, the name, Black Widow. Everyone knows the story. The female devours the male after mating. It's one of the most famous facts in all of biology, except it's mostly not true. In laboratory settings where the male has nowhere to escape, yes, the female will sometimes consume him. But in the wild, males have evolved a remarkably clever survival strategy. Before approaching a female, the male checks the chemical signature of her web. If the silk contains markers indicating she's recently eaten and is well fed, he proceeds. If she's hungry, he leaves. It's a chemical negotiation that happens before any contact, and it works. Most males in nature survive the encounter and move on to mate again. The babies, though, that's a different story. When the egg sac hatches, the first spiderlings to emerge immediately begin consuming their smaller, slower siblings who haven't hatched yet. It's not occasional, it's standard. The black widow's legacy of cannibalism doesn't start with the mother. It starts in the nursery. Her web, by the way, is proportionally stronger than structural steel cable. The silk strands are fine enough to be nearly invisible, but their tensile strength per diameter exceeds the wire used in suspension bridges. Small lizards and ground-dwelling snakes have been found tangled in black widow webs, unable to break free. All of this from a spider that could sit comfortably on a coin. Giant desert centipede. After spiders and scorpions, you might think the things hiding in your space chapter of America's most dangerous animals is done. It's not. Because there is something in the deserts of the American Southwest that makes every arachnid we've talked about feel almost polite by comparison. It doesn't spin a web and wait. It doesn't sit in a boot and hope for contact. It hunts. Actively. Aggressively. And it does it with 40 legs and a set of modified front claws that function like twin hypodermic needles attached to a body built for speed. The giant desert centipede, Scolopendra heros, reaches up to 20 centimeters in length, roughly the size of a standard pen. Its body is segmented, armored in a hard chitinous shell, and painted in vivid bands of black, orange, and red that serve as an honest warning. Everything about this animal is built to cause damage. The first pair of legs aren't really legs at all. They're called forcipules, modified appendages that have evolved into piercing, venom-injecting weapons positioned right below the head. They work like curved, hollow fangs, and they're strong enough to puncture thick human skin and even the skulls of small rodents. This is not a defensive biter. The Scolopendra heros is a pursuit predator. It actively chases prey, insects, lizards, frogs, small snakes. And in caves across the southern United States, it's been documented doing something that sounds like it belongs in a different kind of movie. It climbs to the ceiling of the cave, hangs by its rear legs, and snatches bats out of the air as they fly past. A centipede, catching flying mammals. In the dark. The venom is a unique cocktail of cytotoxins and neurotoxins, including a compound called scolopendrin that disrupts potassium channels in the nervous system. In smaller animals, it interrupts blood flow to the heart. In humans, the sting produces what entomologists have, compared to having a white-hot nail driven directly into the muscle. The area swells immediately, and the pain can persist for days. But here's what makes camping in centipede territory a particular experience. There are reports, well-documented ones from Texas and New Mexico, of people waking up in the middle of the night with the centipede walking across their body. Not stinging, just walking. And that sounds almost harmless until you learn this. The small claws on each of its regular legs, not the venom claws, just the walking legs, are sharp enough to create tiny puncture wounds in the skin with every step. Each puncture introduces trace amounts of irritating compounds and bacteria. So a centipede that simply walks across your chest in the night can leave behind a visible trail of inflamed, infected micro-wounds the next morning, like a dotted red line drawn on your skin. And somehow, despite all of this, the speed, the venom, the aerial bat hunting, the casual skin-shredding midnight walks, the giant desert centipede is also one of the most devoted mothers in the arthropod world. When a female lays her eggs, she wraps her entire body around the clutch in a tight spiral and stays there. For weeks, she doesn't eat. She doesn't hunt. She barely moves. And throughout the entire incubation, she constantly licks each egg, coating them in antifungal secretions from her own body to prevent mold from destroying the brood. If she's separated from her eggs even briefly, the fungal growth begins within hours, and the clutch is lost. 40 legs, cave ceiling bat strikes, venom that feels like fire in your veins, and a mother's devotion that would put most mammals to shame. That's the creature sharing the desert floor with hikers across the American Southwest. And with that, we leave the house. Because the next chapter of American Danger takes us to the deserts and swamps, where the weapons get bigger, the strategies get older, and some of the animals waiting there have been perfecting their technique since before humans existed. Gila monster. The Gila monster, Heloderma suspectum, looks like something a sculptor made from clay and forgot to smooth out. Its body is covered in bead-like scales, black and orange, sometimes pink, arranged in patterns that look almost decorative, like a piece of indigenous pottery. It moves slowly, deliberately. It doesn't sprint, it doesn't strike from a distance. And if you saw one crossing a trail in the Sonoran Desert, your first instinct would probably be to take a photo, not to run. That instinct has cost people, because the Gila monster doesn't need speed. It doesn't need distance. It needs contact. And once it has it, once those jaws close around a finger, a hand, a foot, the clock starts, and it is entirely on the lizard's schedule. Unlike a snake, which bites and pulls back in a fraction of a second, The Gila monster anchors itself. It clamps down with a grip that's been compared to a locking pair of industrial pliers, and then it chews. Not to eat, to deliver. Its venom glands sit in the lower jaw, not the upper, and there are no hollow fangs to inject anything. Instead, the venom flows along grooves carved into the surface of its teeth, pulled into the wound by capillary action as the serrated edges tear the tissue open, millimeter by millimeter. There are documented cases of Gila monsters maintaining a locked bite for over 15 minutes. 15 minutes of a reptile grinding venom into an open wound with the patience of something that has no concept of urgency. The venom itself is primarily neurotoxic and intensely inflammatory. It causes an immediate searing sensation that victims consistently describe as one of the worst things they've ever felt. A deep, radiating heat that spreads from the bite like liquid fire moving through the veins. Blood pressure drops sharply. The area hemorrhages, and the pain doesn't fade for hours. In February of 2024 in Colorado, a 34-year-old man was bitten by his pet Gila monster. The lizard locked onto his hand and wouldn't release. By the time the animal was removed, the venom had triggered systemic collapse. His cardiovascular system failed within hours. He didn't survive. It was one of fewer than 5 such cases in modern recorded history, and it happened inside a home with a pet. Now here's the layer that makes this animal genuinely extraordinary. That same venom, the one that produces agony severe enough to shut down a human heart, contains a peptide called Exendin 4. When scientists isolated it in the 1990s, they discovered it mimics a hormone in the human gut that regulates insulin production. It was almost identical to the human molecule, but far more stable. It lasted longer in the bloodstream. It worked better. That peptide became the foundation of an entire class of diabetes medication. Millions of prescriptions, billions of dollars, countless lives improved or extended, all from the spit of a reptile that hasn't changed its body plan in millions of years. The weapon that causes some of the most extreme pain in the American desert is also one of the most important pharmaceutical discoveries of the 21st century. One more thing. The Gila monster stores fat in its tail, not its body, its tail, with such efficiency that after a single large meal it can go an entire year without eating again. 12 months, no food. It just retreats underground, lives off the reserves, and waits for the next opportunity. Slow, patient, and equipped with a mouth that doubles as both a weapon and a pharmacy. Alligator snapping turtle. Somewhere in the muddy bottom of a river in Mississippi, there's a shape that hasn't moved in 2 hours. It looks like a rock. A rough, dark, algae-covered rock with 3 ridged crests running along its back, sitting in the silt among fallen branches and dead leaves. Nothing about it suggests it's alive. Nothing about it suggests it's watching. Until a fish sees the worm. There's a small, pink, worm-shaped appendage wiggling inside what appears to be a dark cavity in the rock. It moves with the exact rhythm and texture of a live worm, twitching, curling, pulsing. The fish approaches, mouth open, and in a fraction of a second, the rock closes. The alligator. Snapping turtle, Macrochelys teminki, is the largest freshwater turtle in North America, reaching weights over 100 kilograms and shell lengths that rival a car tire. Its head is massive and disproportionate, ending in a beak, not a mouth with teeth, but a true beak, made of hardened keratin, shaped like a hawk's bill, and backed by jaw muscles that generate over 1,000 pounds of pressure per square inch. That pressure is focused on a cutting edge narrower than a human fingertip. The result isn't a crushing force like an alligator's bite. It's a shearing force, a clean mechanical cut, like a bolt cutter closing on a steel rod. Fingers, fish spines, the tails and limbs of juvenile alligators that venture too close. The snapping turtle doesn't hold on and wrestle. It simply closes, and whatever was inside is no longer attached. Commercial fishermen on the Mississippi have learned this the hard way. There are documented cases of men pulling nets from the river bottom in dark water, reaching in to untangle what they thought was debris, and discovering, by the sudden, clean removal of fingers through heavy canvas gloves, that a snapping turtle had been sitting inside the net the entire time. And that tongue, that pink, worm-shaped lure is one of the most refined ambush tools in the animal kingdom. The turtle lies on the bottom with its enormous mouth wide open, completely still, completely camouflaged, and simply moves the lure. Everything else, the shell covered in algae, the dark interior of the mouth, the motionless body, is set dressing. The fish does all the work. The turtle just waits. Now here's a fact that sounds made up but is completely real. The alligator snapping turtle can extract oxygen directly from water through highly vascularized tissue located in its cloaca. In practical terms, it breathes through its rear end. This adaptation allows it to stay submerged and motionless on the river bottom for over 3 hours at a time without ever surfacing for air. For a predator whose entire strategy depends on not moving, this is the difference between a good ambush and a perfect one, and it has had a very long time to perfect it. The alligator snapping turtle's body plan, the ridged shell, the beak, the lure, the cloacal respiration has remained virtually unchanged for millions of years. It looks prehistoric because it is prehistoric. It was already doing this when the animals we now find in museum fossils were still walking the earth. Some specimens pulled from deep river channels are estimated to be well over 100 years old. A century of sitting on the bottom of a river, wiggling a fake worm, and closing a biological guillotine on anything that gets curious. The rivers of the American South are full of things people don't expect, but nothing down there has been waiting longer or more patiently than this: cottonmouth. There's a myth in the American South that's been repeated so many times, it might as well be scripture. The myth goes like this: cottonmouths chase people. They pursue boats. They swim toward kayakers and waders with aggressive intent, driven by a territorial fury that no other snake in the country displays. If you're in the water and a cottonmouth sees you, it's coming for you. It's a compelling story. It's also wrong. But the truth about the cottonmouth, Agkistrodon piscivorus, the water moccasin, the only semi-aquatic pit viper on Earth, is more interesting than the myth, and in many ways more unsettling. Let's start with what semi-aquatic pit viper actually means. Every continent has venomous snakes. Some of them are found near water. But the cottonmouth is the only venomous viper that has fully adapted to life in and on the water as a primary habitat. It hunts in water. It rests on water. It gives birth near water. Its body is built for buoyancy. It floats high on the surface, almost like an inflatable raft, gliding with barely a ripple, leaving no wake. From a distance, on a dark bayou at dusk, it looks like a stick drifting with the current. From up close, it's a thick-bodied, heavy-headed snake with a pair of heat-sensing pits between its eyes and nostrils that can detect the thermal signature of a warm-blooded animal in total darkness, through murky water with zero visibility. It doesn't need to see you. It reads your body heat like a thermal map. The venom is hemotoxic and cytotoxic, a combination that targets both the blood and the tissue simultaneously. It contains metalloproteinase enzymes that break down the walls of blood vessels, dissolve red blood cells, and decompose muscle tissue at the cellular level. A single adult cottonmouth can deliver around 125 milligrams of venom in one strike, enough raw chemistry to cause catastrophic tissue damage in a fully grown human. And the speed of that strike, less than 100 milliseconds, faster than a human blink, faster than the nerve signal traveling from your eye to your brain to register what's happening. A fisherman in Louisiana reached for what he thought was a piece of rope tangled around the motor of his boat. It wasn't rope. The cottonmouth struck twice on his forearm before he could pull his hand back. He survived, barely, thanks to anti-venom. But the tissue damage was so extensive, the muscle in his arm had already begun to break down by the time he reached the hospital. The limb couldn't be saved. What looked like a piece of rope in the water cost him his arm in under a second. So if the cottonmouth doesn't actually chase people, what is it doing when it swims toward a boat or a waiter? Field studies have shown that the snake's infamous behavior, holding its ground, opening its mouth wide to display the bright white interior that gives it its name, is actually a last resort bluff. The white mouth display is a warning, not an attack posture. It's the snake saying, in the only language it has, "I am here, and I don't want to do this." When a cottonmouth swims toward a person, it's almost always heading for the nearest bank or structure to escape, and the human just happens to be in the path. Given room, it will move away. But given room is the key phrase. In the tight waterways of the bayou, in the shallow creeks of the Carolinas, in the flooded backyards of subdivisions built on top of former swampland, room is exactly what neither the snake nor the human has. And that's when contact happens. Not from pursuit, from proximity. And then there's the smell. When a cottonmouth is severely stressed, cornered, grabbed, or stepped on, it activates a pair of glands near the base of its tail and releases a musk so foul and so specific that people who've experienced it never forget it. The most common description, repeated across decades of field reports, is that it smells exactly like rotting watermelon. Not generic decay, not a vague stink. Rotting watermelon. It's one of those bizarre biological details that feels too specific to be real, but it's been confirmed so consistently that herpetologists use it as a secondary identification tool in the field. In the swamps of the southeast, the cottonmouth is not the largest predator. It's not the strongest. It doesn't have the jaw force of an alligator or the ambush patience of a snapping turtle, but it operates in the space between the shallow water, the reed line, the edge of your dock, the underside of your canoe. It lives in the margins, and in the margins of the American South, where land and water blur into the same warm, dark soup, that's exactly where people are most vulnerable. The cottonmouth doesn't need to chase anyone. It just needs to be where you didn't think to look, and that's the real lesson of the southern waterways. The most dangerous things in America aren't always the ones that come after you. Sometimes they're the ones you reach for, step on, or swim past without ever knowing they were there. But if the cottonmouth represents the danger hiding at the water's edge, the next chapter belongs to something that doesn't hide at all. Something that announces itself with the most iconic sound in American wildlife and carries enough chemical payload to end the fight before it starts. Southern coral snake. The southern coral snake, Micrurus fulvius, is, pound for pound, the most venomous snake in North America. Not the most dangerous. That title goes to animals that bite more often and in greater quantities. But in terms of raw chemical potency per milligram of venom delivered, nothing else on the continent comes close. And it looks like a children's toy. Bright red, yellow, and black bands wrapping around a slender, smooth body no thicker than a garden hose. It's small, rarely over 2 feet long. Its head is tiny, round, and almost indistinguishable from its tail. Its eyes are like little black beads. There's nothing about the coral snake that screams danger the way a rattlesnake or a cottonmouth does. No wide triangular head, no dramatic hood, no warning sound. Just clean, vibrant stripes that seem almost decorative, like a piece of candy left in the grass. And that's the problem. A man in Florida found one in his backyard. He recognized the colors but trusted the rhyme, or misremembered it. He picked it up to show his children. The snake, being a coral snake, didn't strike and pull back. Coral snakes don't do that. Their fangs are short, fixed at the front of the mouth, and they can't inject venom the way a viper does. Instead, the snake clamped down on the soft skin between his fingers and began to chew. Just a few seconds of grinding, working the venom deeper into the tissue through mechanical effort. He barely felt it. A mild sting, like a rose thorn. No swelling, no redness, no dramatic reaction. He put the snake down, cleaned the spot, and went about his day. 2 hours later, his vision started to double. His speech slurred. His eyelids drooped and wouldn't respond to his effort to open them. Then his diaphragm, the muscle responsible for breathing, had began to slow down. And then it stopped. He ended up on a mechanical ventilator in an ICU for days. The venom of the coral snake is purely neurotoxic. It doesn't destroy tissue. It doesn't cause swelling or hemorrhaging. There's no dramatic wound to photograph. What it does is far more precise and far more terrifying. It blocks the acetylcholine receptors at the junction between nerves and muscles. In simple terms, it cuts the communication line between your brain and your body. Your brain sends the signal to breathe. The signal arrives at the muscle, and nothing happens. The diaphragm just doesn't contract. The paralysis is progressive. It starts at the extremities, drooping eyelids, difficulty swallowing, and works inward. If untreated, it reaches the respiratory muscles within hours. And here's the detail that makes this snake uniquely dangerous in the modern era. The United States has had ongoing shortages of coral snake anti-venom. Production of the original anti-venom, Crofab doesn't cover it, it requires a specific product, has been inconsistent for years. Every bite is a medical emergency that depends on a supply chain that may or may not have what the hospital needs. Now, back to the rhyme. Red touches yellow. It works. Most of the time. But nature doesn't follow nursery rhymes with perfect consistency. Genetic mutations produce coral snakes with aberrant color patterns. There are documented specimens that hatched completely black. Melanistic individuals with no visible bands at all. Others have been found with the yellow bands reduced to near invisibility. A person relying entirely on the rhyme to make a life-or-death identification is playing a game with rules that the snake didn't agree to. And when the coral snake feels cornered, when there's no escape route left, it does something genuinely bizarre. It tucks its head under its coiled body to protect it, and raises its tail, curling the tip into a shape that mimics a second head. Then it releases a short, sharp popping sound from its cloaca, a burst of air that functions as an acoustic bluff, startling predators just long enough for the snake to slip away. A snake that fakes having two heads and makes a noise with its rear end to buy time, carrying enough neurotoxin per milligram to shut down the lungs of a grown adult, wrapped in colors so vivid that people pick it up on purpose. The coral snake doesn't warn you. It doesn't threaten you. It simply waits for the mistake and lets the chemistry do the rest in silence. But silence is not the only strategy that evolved in the American serpent world, because the next snake on this list took the opposite approach entirely. It doesn't hide. It doesn't blend in. It announces itself with a sound that has been stopping humans in their tracks for thousands of years. Western diamondback rattlesnake, that sound. If you've spent any time in the deserts of Texas, Arizona, or New Mexico, or even if you've only heard it in a movie, you know it. A dry, rapid, buzzing rattle that rises from the ground like a mechanical alarm, so distinctive that the human brain seems to recognize it even before conscious thought catches up. Your body reacts before you do. You freeze. Your heart rate jumps. Your eyes sweep the ground. And somewhere in the dust or the scrub or the rocks, a coil of scales the color of sand and ash is vibrating the tip of its tail at 60 cycles per second. The western diamondback rattlesnake, Crotalus atrox, is the most consequential venomous snake in the United States. Not because it has the most toxic venom, it doesn't. Not because it's the most aggressive. Other species are more defensive. But because of the combination of range, temperament, venom volume, and human contact, it's responsible for more serious envenomation cases and more fatalities from snakebite than any other species in the country. And the numbers behind it are almost hard to believe. An adult diamondback can inject up to 800 milligrams of venom in a single bite. The estimated amount needed to cause a fatal outcome in an average adult human is roughly 100 milligrams. That means a single large diamondback carries in its venom glands at any given moment approximately 8 times the amount needed to end a human life. In one strike, the fangs that deliver it are up to 2 centimeters long, hollow, curved, and hinged on a rotating maxillary bone that folds them flat against the roof of the mouth when not in use. When the snake opens its jaw to strike, the bone rotates forward, snapping the fangs into position like switchblades. The strike itself happens at 3 to 5 meters per second. That's faster than a human eye blink, which takes roughly 300 milliseconds. By the time your brain registers the movement, the fangs are already in and the venom is already flowing. The venom is hemotoxic and myotoxic. It targets the blood and the muscle tissue simultaneously. It destroys fibrinogen, the protein that allows blood to clot, which means the victim's blood essentially loses the ability to stop flowing. At the same time, cytotoxins break down muscle fibers and blood vessel walls. The result is internal hemorrhaging that the body cannot repair. Fluid leaking from capillaries, seeping through mucous membranes, pooling under the skin. Without treatment, the cascade leads to organ failure, typically starting with the kidneys, which become overwhelmed by the sheer volume of destroyed cellular debris flooding the bloodstream. And now, a story from Texas that demonstrates something about this snake that most people don't consider. A man encountered a large diamondback near his property. He grabbed a shovel and severed the snake's head from its body. Threat eliminated, or so he assumed. Several minutes later, he bent down to pick up the remains, and the severed head, lying on the ground, struck his hand and delivered a full envenomation. A head with no body, no heartbeat, no brain function, and it still bit him. Rattlesnakes, all pit vipers in fact, possess thermoregulatory reflexes that continue to operate in the head for a significant period after separation from the body. The heat-sensing pits between the eyes and nostrils still detect warmth, the jaw muscles still contract, and the venom glands still contain their full payload. The man received 26 vials of anti-venom to survive the encounter, from a snake that was, by any reasonable definition, already gone. Now the rattle itself. Everyone knows the sound, but almost everyone gets the biology wrong. The popular myth says you can tell a rattlesnake's age by counting the segments on its rattle, like rings on a tree. 1 segment per year. It sounds logical. It's also completely inaccurate. A rattlesnake adds a new segment to its rattle every time it sheds its skin, which can happen multiple times per year depending on food supply and growth rate. And the segments at the tip break off constantly through normal wear. A 5-year-old snake might have 3 segments. A 2-year-old might have 6. The rattle tells you nothing about age. What the rattle does tell you is that the muscles operating it are among the most specialized in the animal kingdom. The shaker muscles at the base of the tail can sustain vibrations of up to 60 contractions per second for hours without fatiguing. They don't use the same metabolic pathway as normal skeletal muscle. They've evolved a unique mitochondrial density that allows them to fire indefinitely without building up lactic acid. It's a biological siren that never runs out of battery. One more detail that separates the diamondback from most reptiles: it doesn't lay eggs. The western diamondback is viviparous. The young develop inside the mother and are born live, fully formed, already equipped with functioning venom glands and a tiny button at the tip of the tail that will eventually become their first rattle segment. From the moment they enter the world, they're armed. The diamondback is the sound of the American West. The rattle is the last courtesy. After it stops, there's only chemistry and physics, and neither of those negotiate. Asian giant hornet snakes, at least, stay on the ground. The next entry in America's catalog of dangerous animals doesn't crawl, doesn't swim, and doesn't wait in the dark. It flies at 40 kilometers per hour. with a 6mm stinger capable of punching through standard beekeeping protective gear. And it's not supposed to be here. The Asian giant hornet, Vespa mandarinia, the insect the media briefly christened the murder hornet, is native to East Asia. It belongs in the temperate forests of Japan, China, and Korea, where local bee populations have co-evolved specific defense mechanisms against it over millions of years. It does not belong in Washington state. But in 2019, it showed up anyway. The first confirmed sightings triggered a level of entomological alarm that's rare in the United States. Not because a single hornet is particularly dangerous to a healthy adult, though its sting is described by researchers as the sensation of a red-hot nail being hammered directly into muscle tissue. The alarm was about what this insect does to colonies. Because the Asian giant hornet is not a lone hunter. It's a coordinated, strategic, colony-level predator. And its target of choice is the honeybee. Here's how it works. A scout hornet locates a honeybee hive. It marks the entrance with a pheromone, a chemical tag that functions like a GPS pin for the rest of the colony. Within hours, a raiding party arrives, typically around 30 hornets. 30. What follows is one of the most lopsided engagements in the natural world. The hornets land at the entrance of the hive and begin a systematic mechanical process of disassembly. Using their massive mandibles, shaped like serrated wrenches, they grab individual bees one at a time and remove their heads. Not as a feeding behavior, not as a defensive response. As a clearing operation, the heads are discarded on the ground. The bodies pile up. The hornets work through the colony with the efficiency of a factory line. 30 hornets can decapitate over 30,000 bees in under 3 hours. Once the defenders are eliminated, the hornets enter the hive and begin the actual harvest. Not honey, but larvae. They chew the bee larvae into a protein paste, carry it back to their own nest, and feed it to their own young. And here's the biological twist that makes this cycle work. Adult giant hornets cannot digest solid protein. Their digestive systems are built only for liquids. So they feed the solid food to their larvae, and the larvae, in return, secrete a sugary, high-energy liquid called Vespa amino acid mixture, essentially a biological energy drink that fuels the adult hornets for their next raid. The adults feed the babies. The babies fuel the adults. It's a closed-loop system built on the systematic destruction of other colonies. The sting itself, the part that concerns humans, delivers a venom payload far larger than any wasp or bee native to North America. The cocktail contains a cytotoxin called mastoparin that dissolves cell membranes on contact, a neurotoxin that disrupts nerve signaling, and, critically, a pheromone compound that marks the victim for repeated stinging. One sting attracts more hornets. Each hornet can sting multiple times. And unlike honeybees, which lose their stinger and perish after a single use, the giant hornet retracts and reloads. In Japan, where encounters are common, multiple stings can cause rhabdomyolysis, the rapid breakdown of muscle tissue, leading to kidney failure as the destroyed muscle proteins overwhelm the filtration system. Dozens of people in Asia are hospitalized every year from mass stinging events. In the United States, the introduction was caught early. Entomologists and the Washington State Department of Agriculture launched an aggressive eradication campaign, tracking hornets with radio transmitters glued to their bodies, tracing them back to underground nests and destroying colonies before they could establish a breeding population. As of the last reports, the effort appears to have been successful in containing the spread. But contained is not the same as eliminated. And the honeybee populations of the Pacific Northwest now exist with the knowledge that somewhere across the Pacific, there is an insect that can fly over 80 kilometers in a single day, organize a strike force of 30 individuals, and wipe out an entire colony in an afternoon, using a stinger that the best protective equipment in American beekeeping cannot reliably stop. The buzzing of the giant hornet is low, heavy, and mechanical, closer to the sound of a small drone motor than anything biological. People who've encountered them in the field say you hear it before you see it. And when you see it, 5 centimeters of armored insect, with a wingspan wider than your thumb is long, hovering at eye level, the scale alone is enough to rewrite your understanding of what an insect can be. From the silent neurotoxin of the coral snake, to the chemical siren of the diamondback, to the airborne siege weapon of the giant hornet, the theme of this chapter has been chemical warfare at every scale. Venom that whispers, venom that screams, and venom delivered from the sky. But the next chapter of America's most dangerous animals leaves chemistry behind entirely. Because the animals coming up don't need venom. They don't need toxins or specialized glands or molecular weapons. They have something simpler and in many ways far harder to survive: mass, speed, and a temper that no one saw coming. Jaguarundi. There's a wild cat living in the southernmost tip of Texas that looks like someone tried to build a feline out of spare parts from 3 different animals. The jaguarundi, Herpylurus jaguarundi, has the elongated body of a weasel, the flat head of an otter, the short legs of a dachshund, and the tail of a small panther. It's so unlike any other cat in North America that early field sightings were routinely dismissed as misidentified river otters, large minks, or someone's escaped exotic pet. Even trained wildlife officers sometimes do a double take. It's small, roughly the size of a large house cat, maybe 8 to 9 kilograms. It lives in the dense, thorny brush country along the Texas-Mexico border, and unlike almost every other wild felide on the planet, it hunts during the day. Not at dusk, not at dawn, in full daylight, moving through chaparral so thick and tangled that larger predators, coyotes, bobcats, physically can't follow it. Its low, flat profile slides through gaps in the thorns like a snake with legs. And then there's the voice. Scientists have recorded over 13 distinct vocalizations from this one small cat. 13. That's an extraordinary range for a solitary feline. It chirps, it whistles. It makes a purring grunt that sounds like a small primate. And here's the part that made field biologists question their own recordings. It can mimic the calls of local songbirds. Not approximately, convincingly. The jaguarundi sits in a bush, produces the sound of a bird in distress, and waits. When a real bird comes to investigate, the cat launches vertically, over 2 meters straight up, and snatches it out of the air with its claws. A cat that imitates birds. In Texas, during business hours, conservation biologists who've handled jaguarundis during capture and release studies in the field report that the animal's aggression, when cornered, is completely out of proportion to its size. One team described a juvenile, not even fully grown, shredding through double-layered Kevlar handling gloves with a continuous barrage of claw strikes so fast they couldn't count individual swipes. The sound it made while doing it wasn't a growl or a hiss. It was a shriek that sounded like a bird of prey. And here's the detail that confused scientists for an entire century. Jaguarundi kittens from the same litter are born in 2 completely different color phases. Some come out dark charcoal gray, almost black. Others are born a warm reddish-brown like cinnamon. The difference is so stark that 19th century naturalists classified them as 2 entirely separate species. It took modern genetics to confirm they were the same animal, born side by side, from the same mother, wearing completely different coats. The jaguarundi is one of the rarest and least studied predators in the United States. Most Americans will never see one. Most Americans don't even know it exists. But in the dense brush of the Rio Grande Valley, a cat that sounds like a bird and moves like a weasel is doing just fine. Hidden in plain daylight. An unknown cat in the Texas brush is a curiosity. But Texas has a much bigger problem roaming its land. About 6 million of them. And these ones aren't hiding. Wild boar. Somewhere on a farm, a domestic pig escapes. It's an ordinary pig. Pink skin, floppy ears, round belly. the kind of animal children feed at county fairs. It pushes through a broken fence, wanders into the tree line, and disappears into the woods. Within months, something changes. The pig's body begins to express genes that were always there but never activated. Coarse, dark hair, bristles, start growing across its back and shoulders. Its snout elongates. Its lower canine teeth, which were always present but worn down by domesticated feeding, begin to grow and grow. They curve upward, sharpening themselves continuously against the upper teeth in a self-honing loop that produces tusks. Ivory blades up to 12 centimeters long, exposed and ready. Its behavior shifts in parallel. Aggression increases. Social hierarchy intensifies. Foraging becomes predatory. It starts eating not just roots and grubs, but bird eggs, fawns, and small mammals. Within a single generation, not over centuries, not over decades, a farm pig becomes a feral boar. Same species, same DNA, different animal entirely. This is not a rare phenomenon. It's happening across the United States right now, and it has been for decades. There are over 6 million feral hogs in the country, concentrated most heavily in Texas, but spreading rapidly through the South, the Midwest, and increasingly into northern states. They cause an estimated $2.5 billion in agricultural destruction every year. They tear up fields, contaminate water sources, destroy native habitats, and reproduce at a rate that makes control efforts feel like bailing water from a sinking ship. A single sow can produce 2 litters a year with up to 12 piglets per litter. Do the math, and the numbers become overwhelming fast. But the destruction is only half the story. The other half is what happens when a human gets too close. A feral boar in full charge is 150 kilograms of dense bone and muscle moving at 45 kilometers per hour, with its head low and its tusks angled upward. The geometry is almost purpose-built for damage to humans. The tusks sit at the exact height of the upper leg and groin, where the femoral artery runs close to the surface. A single upward slash from a charging boar can open that artery in a clean cut. And unlike many animals that charge, make contact, and retreat, feral hogs are known to circle back. They attack, pull away, and come again, and again. In Texas, a 59-year-old woman stepped out of her front door before dawn to walk to her car. It was still dark. A group of feral hogs had moved into her residential yard overnight. They charged her before she could reach the vehicle. The lacerations on her legs and arms from the tusks were so deep and numerous that emergency services could not stabilize her in time. She was found in her own driveway, and there's one more layer to the boar that most people don't know about: the shield. Male feral hogs develop a thick plate of subcutaneous cartilage across their shoulders, a biological armor that grows denser with age and confrontation. It's tough enough to absorb bites from coyotes and alligators, and, according to hunters across the South, it can deflect low-caliber bullets at certain angles. The animal's tolerance for physical damage is so extreme that there are documented cases of boars continuing to charge after absorbing multiple rounds from standard firearms. They roll in mud not just for temperature regulation, but because the dried mud layer forms a secondary shell over their skin, an additional coat of armor against insect bites and the teeth of rivals. An animal that wasn't supposed to be here, that transforms from a farm pet into an armored, tusked, self-sharpening engine of destruction in a matter of months. And that has colonized a third of the country with no natural predator capable of controlling its numbers. If that doesn't redefine what dangerous means in America, the next one will. American bison. There's a photograph that circulates online every summer. A tourist at Yellowstone National Park, usually with a phone raised, usually smiling, standing 3 or 4 meters away from an American bison. Sometimes closer, sometimes reaching out a hand, sometimes posing a child next to it. The bison stands there, chewing grass, looking docile, looking enormous, looking like a very large, very furry cow that wandered out of a Western movie. And every ranger in the park watches these moments with the same tight expression. Because they know what's about to happen. Not always, but often enough that Yellowstone publishes warnings about it every single year. The American bison, injures more visitors at Yellowstone than bears, wolves, and elk combined. And the reason is always the same. People don't believe it's dangerous. They see the size, 1,000 kilograms, the largest land mammal in North America, and they interpret it as slowness. They see the bulk and assume clumsiness. They see it standing still, grazing, and they project the temperament of livestock onto a wild animal that has been charging predators across open plains for hundreds of thousands of years. Here is what a bison can actually do. It can accelerate from a dead stop to 55 kilometers per hour in seconds. That's faster than any human who has ever lived. It can jump vertically over a fence 1.8 meters tall. 1,000-kilogram animal airborne, clearing a barrier taller than most adults. Its skull is a solid mass of reinforced bone backed by a neck and shoulder structure, so dense with muscle that the hump on its back, that distinctive silhouette, is essentially a biological battering ram anchored to the skeleton by tendons thick enough to resist the impact of a head-on collision with another bison at full speed. When a bison charges a person, the mechanics are straightforward and devastating. The head drops. The horns, short, curved, and made of solid keratin, aim forward. The animal closes the distance before the person can react. On impact, the victim is either gored, the horn tips puncturing the torso with the force of a freight vehicle, or launched into the air. 3 meters, sometimes higher. The landing alone causes fractures. The trampling that may follow, heavy hooves on soft tissue and exposed bone, finishes the rest. A woman at Yellowstone ignored the posted 25-meter distance rule. She walked within 3 meters of a bull for a photo. The bison gave exactly one warning. It lowered its head and exhaled a heavy blast of air through its nostrils. She didn't move. What happened next took less than 2 seconds. She was airborne, then on the ground with punctured lungs and a shattered pelvis. And here's a detail that rangers and wildlife biologists have been sharing for years, hoping it will save lives. The bison's tail is a real-time mood indicator. Tail hanging down and relaxed, the animal is calm. Tail raised to a 45-degree angle. It's alert, it's watching you, and you should be walking backward. Tail straight up, vertical, rigid. It has already decided to charge. By the time the tail goes up, the decision is made. You're not negotiating anymore. Despite all of this, the bison's reputation as America's gentle giant persists. Every summer, social media fills with new footage of tourists walking up to bison like they're approaching a statue. And every summer, the medical reports tell the same story. The bison doesn't want to hurt you. It doesn't hunt. It doesn't stalk. It eats grass. But it also weighs 1,000 kilograms, runs faster than a horse, jumps higher than a deer, and has a skull built to absorb collisions that would flatten a car hood. Respect the distance and it's a majestic animal on a postcard. Ignore the distance and it's physics. The bison is big, but the next animal on this list stands even taller. And where the bison at least gives you a warning, the lowered head, the snort, the tail. This one operates on a hair trigger connected to a brain that processes the world through a permanent state of nervous suspicion. Moose, 2.1 meters tall at the shoulder. Not at the head, at the shoulder. The head, topped in males with a set of antlers that can span 1.8 meters from tip to tip, sits even higher. An adult bull moose, Alces alces, stands taller than most SUVs on the road. It weighs up to 700 kilograms, and it has, by the consensus of every wildlife biologist who studied it, one of the most unpredictable temperaments of any large mammal in North America. The moose is not aggressive in the way a predator is aggressive. It doesn't hunt. It doesn't chase down prey. It eats aquatic plants, tree bark, and shrubs. But it exists in a permanent state of reactive defensiveness, a baseline level of neurological alertness that means any surprise, any perceived encroachment, any accidental positioning between a cow and her calf can trigger a response that's immediate, violent, and nearly impossible to outrun. And here's the part most people don't think about. The moose encounters humans more often than almost any other large animal in America. Not in national parks, on roads. In Alaska and Maine, the two states with the highest moose populations, vehicle collisions with moose are not freak accidents. They are a seasonal constant, hundreds per year. And the physics of these collisions are uniquely horrifying because of the animal's anatomy. A moose stands on legs that are long, thin, and positioned high off the ground, like a massive body balanced on stilts. When a car hits a moose, the bumper strikes the legs. The legs fold, and the full body, 700 kilograms of bone, muscle, and antler, collapses onto the hood and directly through the windshield, into the passenger cabin. It's not like hitting a deer, where the animal bounces over the roof. It's like having a grand piano drop through your ceiling from the second floor while you're driving. The survival rate for occupants in high-speed moose collisions is significantly lower than for any other animal vehicle impact in North America. On foot, the moose is no less formidable. When a moose decides to attack, whether defending a calf, startled at close range, or simply in the agitated state that males enter during the autumn mating season, it doesn't use its antlers the way you might expect. It doesn't lower its head and charge like a bison. It rears up on its hind legs, its full height now approaching 3 meters, and comes down with its front hooves. Those hooves are wide, hard, and edged like hatchets, designed for breaking through ice and compacted snow. When they come down on a human body, they fracture skulls, collapse rib cages, and rupture organs with mechanical precision. In Alaska, a university professor was walking across a snow-covered campus when he inadvertently stepped between a cow moose and her calf hidden in nearby brush. The cow charged without sound. She hit him in the chest, knocked him flat, and began stomping repeatedly and on his head and torso. He suffered severe skull fractures and pulmonary collapse. Students in a nearby parking lot managed to scare the animal away by leaning on car horns. He survived, but barely. And the antlers, those enormous, flat, palmate structures that make the bull moose one of the most visually striking animals in the hemisphere, are not permanent. They fall off. Every winter, after the mating season ends, the antlers simply detach from the skull. Gone. The bull walks around bareheaded for months, and then in spring they start growing again. From scratch, at a rate of up to 2.5 centimeters per day. That's one of the fastest rates of tissue growth in the entire animal kingdom. A full set of antlers, bone, cartilage, blood vessels, the whole structure, regenerated from nothing to full span in a matter of months. While growing, they're covered in a soft, velvety skin laced with blood vessels that supply nutrients to the developing bone. When the antlers reach full size, the velvet dries, cracks, and peels away in strips that the moose rubs off against trees. A process that leaves the forest looking like something walked through it and shredded the bark off every trunk at head height. One more thing. Moose are extraordinary swimmers. They wade into lakes and rivers regularly to feed on aquatic vegetation growing on the bottom. And they can dive up to 6 meters deep. They close their nostrils using a specialized muscular fold, a biological seal, and descend to the lake bed to pull up plants with their mouths. A 700-kilogram animal, underwater, with its nostrils clamped shut, grazing on the bottom of a lake like an enormous hairy submarine. The moose is not the animal you worry about when you think of danger in America. but it's the one that shows up on your commute, in your yard, and on the campus where your kids go to school. It doesn't need a wilderness setting to be dangerous. It just needs a reason. And its definition of reason is a lot broader than yours. From the unknown cat in the Texas brush to the feral army that rewrites ecosystems, from the bison that charges tourists to the moose that walks through windshields, this chapter was about the animals that don't look like threats. The ones that fool you with fur, with size that reads as slowness, with herbivore status that reads as harmless. Gray wolf. There's a moment in a wolf hunt that has nothing to do with teeth. It happens before the chase, before any contact, before the first burst of speed. It's the moment the prey realizes, not through sound, not through smell, but through sight, that gray shapes are appearing between the trees on both sides. Not running yet, just there, walking at a steady pace, keeping distance, matching direction. The elk or the deer or the caribou begins to move faster. The shapes keep pace. It changes direction. The shapes adjust. It runs. And the shapes, without urgency, without panic, begin their relay. The gray wolf, Canis lupus, does not overpower its prey. Not at first. It outweights it. A wolf pack can sustain a pursuit across snow and broken terrain for over 20 kilometers. Not sprinting. Rotating. The wolves at the front of the chase run at moderate speed, burning the prey's energy, while the wolves in the rear conserve theirs. When the leaders tire, they fall back and fresh legs take the front. The prey has no relay. The prey has one body, one set of lungs, one supply of glycogen in its muscles. The wolves have 6, or 8, or 12. By the time the pack closes in, the target isn't fighting. It's barely standing. And then the technique shifts. The wolves don't go for the throat. That's a cat strategy. Wolves target the hindquarters, the hamstrings, the tendons at the back of the legs. They bite and tear at the muscles that keep the animal upright, stripping its ability to run, to kick, to stand. Once the prey is down, the pack converges. The whole process, from the first appearance of gray shapes between the trees to the final moment, can take hours. Or it can take 20 minutes. It depends on the snow, the terrain, and how long the prey holds out. The bite force behind each strike, around 400 psi, enough to snap the leg bones of a full-grown deer and crack them open for the marrow inside. Now, the myth, the one you've heard 100 times. The alpha wolf, the dominant leader who rules the pack through aggression, intimidation, and physical superiority. The wolf at the top of a brutal hierarchy, enforcing order through force. It's one of the most widespread concepts in popular psychology. People use it to describe CEOs, athletes, social dynamics. Entire self-help industries have been built on the alpha framework. It was wrong. The scientist who coined the term, L. David Mech, one of the most respected wolf researchers in history, spent years trying to correct it after his original study was published. The concept of the alpha came from observations of captive wolves, strangers forced into artificial groups in enclosed spaces, where unnatural dominance hierarchies formed out of stress and confinement. In the wild, Mech discovered, wolf packs aren't hierarchies at all. They're families. The alpha male and alpha female are simply the mother and father. The rest of the pack is their offspring, juveniles from current and previous years. Leadership isn't taken by force. It's inherited through parenthood. The pack follows its parents the same way a human family follows its elders, through familiarity, trust, and cooperation. Mech has publicly asked for the term to be retired. The book that popularized it has been out of print at his request for decades. But the myth persists, because the idea of a dominant wolf is more compelling than the reality of a devoted parent. In practice, a wild wolf pack functions more like a special operations unit staffed by siblings and led by a married couple. They share food. They babysit each other's pups. They mourn their losses. Researchers have documented wolves returning repeatedly to the spot where a pack member went down, sniffing the ground, vocalizing and refusing to leave. But make no mistake, the family is still a hunting machine. In 2010, in a remote community in Alaska, a young teacher went for a run on a trail near her village. A small pack of wolves, later determined to be a family group in a territory with depleted prey, intercepted her on the path. The investigation found evidence that she had tried to fight back. But wolves hunt in coordinated patterns, flanking from the sides, cutting off retreat lines, alternating pressure between multiple directions. Against a pack using these tactics, a single individual on foot has almost no viable defense. She didn't make it back. It was one of the rarest events in modern North American wildlife records, a confirmed case of a healthy pack treating a human as prey. It underscored something biologists already knew, but the public didn't want to hear. Wolves avoid humans almost universally. But almost is not always. And in the edge cases, winter, famine, a pack pushed beyond its threshold, the same coordination that makes them extraordinary hunters of elk, makes them something far more difficult to confront. One last detail, the howl. Everyone knows the sound. But not everyone knows that each wolf in a pack has a vocally unique howl, a distinct acoustic signature like a fingerprint made of sound. Researchers can identify individual wolves by their howls alone, and the wolves themselves use this system to communicate identity, location, and intent across distances of more than 10 kilometers in open terrain. A family that hunts as one, howls as individuals, and runs its prey into the ground with the patience of a marathon and the precision of a chess match. The wolf hunts with a team. The next predator on American soil needs no one. It hunts alone, from above, in complete silence. And if it decides you're the target, the first sign you'll have is the weight of its body hitting your back. Mountain lion. Here is a statistic that sounds like a contradiction. The mountain lion, puma concolor, is the most widely distributed large wild cat in the Western Hemisphere. It ranges from the Canadian Yukon to the southern tip of South America. It lives in deserts, mountains, forests, swamps, and the suburban fringes of cities like Los Angeles, Denver, and Boulder. There are thousands of them in California alone, and almost nobody ever sees one. That's not because they're rare. It's because they're better at not being seen than almost any large predator on Earth. The mountain lion, also called the puma, the cougar, the catamount, depending on where you are, is the apex ambush specialist of the American wilderness. It doesn't track prey from a distance like a wild wolf. It doesn't announce itself like a rattlesnake. It watches. From a ledge, from a tree limb, from a rock outcrop above a trail. It observes the path its target takes. It calculates the distance. And when the geometry is right, it drops. 12 meters. That's how far a mountain lion can launch itself forward in a single bound, horizontally, from a standstill. It can also leap vertically, 5.5 meters straight up, the height of a second-story window, without a running start. Combine that with a top sprint speed of 80 kilometers per hour, a body mass of up to 70 kilograms of lean, fast-twitch muscle, and retractable claws that function like surgical hooks. And you have an animal that covers the gap between hidden and on top of you in less time than it takes to turn your head. The attack itself follows a pattern that hasn't changed in millions of years of feline evolution. The puma lands on the prey's back, anchoring itself with its claws, 5 centimeters long, curved, and sharp enough to puncture leather. It wraps its forelimbs around the shoulders or neck, and then it bites, not randomly. One of 2 targets, the base of the skull, where a precise bite can separate the cervical vertebrae and shut everything down instantly, or the throat, where sustained pressure on the trachea collapses the airway. The prey, a deer, an elk calf, a coyote, typically does not vocalize. There's no sound. The attack is so fast and so structurally targeted that the nervous system doesn't have time to process a pain response before the airway is compromised. Wildlife cameras have captured these takedowns in full. They last seconds, and the silence in the footage is the most unsettling part. In March of 2024 in California, two brothers, 18 and 21, were hiking in a remote area when a mountain lion ambushed the younger one from behind. The older brother turned and fought the animal directly, trying to pull it off. The puma displayed the trait that makes it so dangerous in close quarters: absolute commitment. Once it engages, it does not disengage. The encounter ended with the older brother losing his life and the younger one severely injured. It took the arrival of armed responders to end the situation. Attacks on humans are rare. Statistically, you're far more likely to be struck by lightning. But the nature of the attack, from behind without warning, targeting the neck and spine, means that survival without third-party intervention is exceptionally difficult. You don't get a chance to face the animal, assess the threat, and react. By the time you know it's there, you're already in its grip. And here's the detail that ensures the mountain lion will live in the back of your mind the next time you walk a forest trail. It can't roar. Despite being nearly the size of a leopard, the mountain lion is not classified among the great cats, the Pantherinae, the group that includes lions, tigers, and jaguars. Its larynx lacks the flexible hyoid bone that produces the deep, resonant roar. What it produces instead is something far stranger and far more disturbing. It screams. A high-pitched, wavering, agonized shriek that carries through the forest at night and sounds unmistakably, unsettlingly, like a human being in absolute distress. People who've heard it for the first time in the backcountry have called emergency services, convinced someone was in trouble. Rangers in Colorado and Montana have fielded these calls for decades. After a successful hunt, the mountain lion doesn't eat the entire prey at once. It drags the carcass, sometimes uphill, sometimes into dense cover, and buries it under a mound of leaves, dirt, and branches. This behavior is called caching. The cat then leaves, patrols its territory, and returns to feed from the same cache over several days. If you ever find a deer-sized mound of disturbed earth and leaves in the woods with drag marks leading to it, walk the other way. The owner is not far. A cat that screams like a person. That leaps the length of a school bus. That watches from above in silence and strikes the spine with surgical precision. And that has been doing this, unchanged, across the Americas, since before humans walked this continent. On land, the mountain lion owns the ambush. It's the undisputed master of the unseen strike from above. But there's one more domain on this list where the ambush comes from a direction even more terrifying than a tree branch. It comes from below, from cold, dark water, at 40 kilometers per hour. And when it arrives, the surface of the ocean explodes. Great white shark, 4,000 pounds per square inch. That's the estimated bite force of a large adult great white shark, Carcharodon carcharias. It's the strongest measured bite of any living animal on Earth, stronger than the alligator, stronger than the saltwater crocodile, stronger than the hydraulic press at a junkyard, and delivered by a set of jaws lined with rows of serrated triangular teeth that function less like teeth and more like steak knives arranged in a conveyor belt. A great white doesn't keep its teeth for life. It cycles through them continuously, losing and replacing individual teeth throughout its entire existence. Over the course of its lifetime, a single shark may go through 20,000 teeth. There's always a fresh edge. There's always a backup row pushing forward from behind, like ammunition being loaded into a magazine. But the teeth are only the end of the process. The real weapon of the great white is what happens before the bite. The approach. Great whites that hunt seals, and the populations off the coasts of California and Massachusetts are among the most active seal hunters on the planet. Use a technique that biologists call vertical ambush predation. The shark positions itself deep below the target, sometimes 30 or 40 meters down, in water dark enough to render it invisible from above. It watches the silhouette of the seal against the light at the surface, and then it accelerates, straight up, at speeds clocked at up to 40 kilometers per hour. The impact is so violent that the shark often breaches. Its entire body launches out of the water with the prey clamped in its jaws before crashing back into the sea. High-speed cameras have captured these breaches in full. The explosion of water. The airborne mass of a 3-ton animal clearing the surface like a missile. The physics of it are staggering. The acceleration required to launch that much weight out of the ocean, against gravity, while simultaneously closing its jaws around a moving target, represents one of the most extreme bursts of energy in the animal kingdom. And the shark does not rely on vision alone. In fact, in the final meters of the approach, it barely uses its eyes at all. The snout of a great white is covered in a network of gel-filled pores called the ampullae of Lorenzini. These organs detect electrical fields, the faint bioelectric signals generated by the muscle contractions and heartbeat of a living animal in the water. The sensitivity is almost beyond comprehension. A great white can detect a voltage gradient of 5 billionths of a volt per centimeter. In practical terms, it can sense the heartbeat of a seal from several body lengths away, through murky water, in total darkness, with its eyes closed. It doesn't need to see you. It can feel your pulse. In 2022, off the coast of San Luis Obispo, California, a surfer was sitting on his board in overcast conditions when a great white estimated at 4.5 meters struck from below. The shark removed most of the man's right leg in a single pass. The impact was described by witnesses on the beach as sounding like a car collision, a concussive boom followed by a spray of water that was visible from shore. The thermal and hemorrhagic shock was so immediate that the victim lost consciousness before he could be pulled onto the sand. And here's the fact that reframes every great white attack you've ever heard of. The shark almost certainly didn't want him. The overwhelming scientific consensus, supported by decades of behavioral research, stomach content analysis, and attack geometry studies, is that the vast majority of great white attacks on surfers are cases of mistaken identity. From directly below, looking up toward the sunlit surface, the silhouette of a human lying on a surfboard with arms and legs extended on either side is nearly identical to the silhouette of a pinniped, a seal or a sea lion. The shark doesn't know it's a person. It reads the shape, the size, the movement pattern, and it initiates the same predatory sequence it would use on a seal. The bite, which to the human feels like a devastating, life-altering event, is, to the shark, a test. A sample. Great whites are investigatory biters. They bite to determine what something is. And when they bite a human and encounter neoprene, fiberglass, and bones instead of blubber, they almost always release and leave. They're not interested in humans as food. The caloric return isn't worth the effort. A seal wrapped in a thick layer of energy-dense fat is worth the attack. A bony, lean human in a wetsuit is not. That's cold comfort when you're sitting on a surfboard off Cape Cod. But it's the truth. And the great white has one more biological constraint that makes it unique among apex predators. It cannot stop moving. Ever. The great white uses a respiratory system called ram ventilation. It pushes water over its gills by swimming forward with its mouth slightly open. It has no mechanism to pump water while stationary. If it stops swimming, water stops flowing over the gills and the shark suffocates. So it swims, continuously, from the moment it's born until the moment it's gone. It even sleeps while swimming, using reduced activity brain states that keep the body moving through the water on autopilot. An animal that has been swimming without pause since the day it entered the ocean. That replaces 20,000 teeth over a lifetime. That detects heartbeats through water. That launches itself vertically at highway speed. And that, despite every movie, every news headline, every cultural fear that's been built around it, almost never means to target a human. American alligator. The American alligator, Alligator mississippiensis, is, in the most literal sense of the word, a living fossil. Not as a metaphor, not as a loose comparison. The basic architecture of this animal, the armored scutes, the tail-propelled locomotion, the ambush from water hunting strategy, has remained functionally unchanged for over 80 million years. It predates the extinction event. It predates most modern mammals. It watched the entire rise of human civilization from the same position it holds today. Eyes and nostrils just above the waterline, body submerged, perfectly still, perfectly patient. And it is everywhere in the American South. Florida alone is home to over 1.3 million alligators. They live in freshwater lakes, rivers, canals, golf course ponds, swimming pools, drainage ditches, and the retention ponds behind suburban shopping centers. In the Everglades, they are the undisputed rulers of the ecosystem. And as residential development continues to push into former wetland, the boundary between alligator habitat and human habitat has become a line drawn in water, a line that neither species fully respects. The numbers behind the animal are the kind that force you to recalibrate what strong means. 3,000 pounds per square inch. That's the closing force of an adult alligator's jaws. It's enough to crush the shell of a full-grown turtle, enough to snap a cow femur, enough to compress a human limb into a shape that no longer functions as a limb. Among all living animals, only the saltwater crocodile generates more jaw pressure. The alligator sits comfortably in second place, and second place at 3,000 psi is more than sufficient. But the bite is only the beginning. What makes the alligator uniquely terrifying is what comes after. The death roll. Once the jaws lock onto a target, a limb, a torso, the neck of a deer that leaned too far over the bank, the alligator pulls the prey into the water. Deep enough that footing is lost, deep enough that the surface becomes a ceiling, and then it rotates. The entire body spins on its longitudinal axis, a violent, twisting barrel roll powered by the tail and core muscles, while the jaws remain clamped. The physics are simple and devastating. The torque of the roll exceeds the structural integrity of the tissue in the jaws. Limbs separate, joints dislocate. Muscle and connective tissue tear apart along natural fault lines. The prey doesn't need to be overpowered. It needs to be disassembled. And the roll does that with mechanical indifference. In 2023, in Florida, an 85-year-old woman was walking her dog near a canal behind her condominium. A 3-meter alligator lunged from the water, crossing the distance between the bank and the walking path in a burst so fast that witnesses described it as a single, explosive motion, like something being launched. It seized her by the leg and pulled her into the canal. The entire event, from the moment the alligator broke the surface to the moment she was fully submerged, lasted less than a minute. And here's the biological contradiction that makes the alligator so strange. Those jaws, the ones that close with 3,000 psi, that can crack bone and crush shell, are opened by muscles so weak that a human being can hold them shut with bare hands. The closing muscles are enormous, anchored to a skull designed as a pressure platform. But the opening muscles are thin, small, and relatively powerless. A few wraps of duct tape around the snout of a full-grown alligator will keep its mouth sealed. Trappers have been using this trick for decades. It's one of the most bizarre asymmetries in the animal kingdom. A jaw that can destroy almost anything, attached to a hinge that can be defeated by adhesive tape. Now, the Everglades have added a new chapter to the alligator's story in recent years, and it's one that nobody planned for. Burmese pythons, invasive constrictors released or escaped from the exotic pet trade, have established a breeding population in southern Florida. Some of these snakes exceed 5 meters in length, and they've begun competing directly with alligators for territory and prey. The encounters between the two species are extraordinary. a python wrapping its coils around an alligator while the alligator attempts the death roll inside the coils. Both animals deploying their primary weapon simultaneously, each trying to outlast the other. Photographs have surfaced of pythons that swallowed juvenile alligators whole, and of alligators that tore their way out from the inside. It's an arms race between two apex predators that were never supposed to meet, one that's been here for 80 million years, and one that arrived in a cardboard box from Southeast Asia. One final detail. The sex of every baby alligator is determined not by genetics, but by temperature. The mother builds a nest of decomposing vegetation, a mound that generates its own heat through bacterial activity. If the internal temperature of the nest stays above 34 degrees Celsius, the clutch produces males. Below 30 degrees, females. In between, a mix of both. The future of the alligator population is literally controlled by the warmth of a pile of rotting leaves. 80 million years. The same body, the same strategy, the same position at the waterline. The asteroid couldn't end it. The pythons can't displace it. And the suburbs of Florida keep building closer to the edge of its domain every year. The alligator perfected its method before mammals even existed and never needed to revise it. But far to the north, past the forests, past the mountains, past the last highway and the last town, there's something that didn't just survive the ice. It became the ice. And unlike every other predator on this list, it doesn't attack humans out of defense, or territory, or surprise. It does it because it's hungry. Polar bear. Every bear on this list, every bear you've ever read about in the context of danger, attacks humans for a reason that, on some level, makes sense. A grizzly charges because you surprised it, or you're near its cubs, or you're between it and its food. A black bear bluff charges to scare you away. The motivation is defensive, territorial, reactive. The bear doesn't want you. It wants you gone. The polar bear, Ursus maritimus, is different. The polar bear wants you, not because you threatened it, not because you're near its den, but because you are made of calories, and in the Arctic, the most calorie-scarce environment on the planet, everything that's made of calories is food. The polar bear is one of the only land predators on Earth that actively, deliberately, and consistently views humans as prey. Not as a threat to manage, not as an intruder to expel, as something to eat. And it is built for that purpose with a specificity that borders on engineering. 600 kilograms, the largest land carnivore on Earth. A skull elongated and narrowed compared to other bears. Optimized for plunging into seal-breathing holes in the ice. Canine teeth long enough to puncture the thick blubber layer of a ringed seal in a single bite. Paws 30 centimeters in diameter, the size of manhole covers, with rough pads and dense fur on the soles that provide traction on ice and silence during approach, and a sense of smell so acute that it can detect a seal lying under a meter of solid ice from over 1.5 kilometers away. 1.5 kilometers through ice. The hunting method is patience distilled to its purest form. The polar bear locates a seal's breathing hole, a small opening in the ice that the seal must return to periodically for air. The bear positions itself next to the hole and waits, motionless, for hours, sometimes for an entire day. No movement, no sound. Just the bear, the ice, and the mathematics of probability, knowing that eventually the seal must surface. And when it does, in the fraction of a second that the seal's head clears the water, the bear strikes. One paw, one bite. Cranial collapse. It's over before the seal's body has fully emerged. Now, what happens when there are no seals? In the northernmost settlements of Alaska, places like Utqiagvik, formerly Barrow, polar bears and humans share geography. Military radar stations, research outposts, and indigenous communities exist within the bear's range. And there are documented cases, not rumors, not campfire stories, but official incident reports of polar bears tracking the scent of cooking food for kilometers across open tundra, arriving at inhabited structures and breaking in, not pushing through screen doors, breaking through reinforced metal barriers with single strikes of their forepaws, peeling back corrugated steel panels, smashing double-pane windows designed for Arctic insulation, and then entering the structure with the calm, methodical focus of an animal that has located food and sees no reason to stop. Personnel at remote stations have been chased between buildings in the darkness of the polar night, months-long periods where the sun never rises, by bears that moved with a silence that contradicts their size. The pads of their feet are covered in fur that muffles every step on ice and snow. The first warning is often not a sound but a shape, a pale form materializing out of the darkness at close range, already moving forward. And that pale form, the iconic white fur, is one of the great optical illusions of the natural world. The polar bear's fur is not white. Each individual hair is a hollow, transparent tube. It contains no white pigment. The hair appears white because the hollow structure scatters and reflects visible light, the same way snow appears white despite being made of clear ice crystals. Under the fur, the bear's actual skin is jet black, a color that absorbs solar radiation for warmth in the Arctic sun. And here's where it gets surreal. Under infrared thermal imaging, the kind used by military and search and rescue operations to detect warm bodies in cold environments, the polar bear is virtually invisible. Its fur and fat insulation are so effective at trapping body heat that almost no thermal radiation escapes to the surface. On a thermal camera, a 600-kilogram apex predator registers as nothing, a blank space in the snow, a ghost. Classified scientifically as a marine mammal, alongside whales, seals, and dolphins, the polar bear is as much a creature of the ocean as it is of the land. There are satellite-tracked records of individual bears swimming continuously for over 9 days in open Arctic water, covering more than 600 kilometers without stopping to rest. 600 kilometers. In freezing ocean water, without land, without ice. Just swimming. In the Arctic, there is no negotiation. There is no bluff charge. There is no warning display. The polar bear approaches, and the encounter is binary. You are armed and prepared, or you are not. The survival statistics in the second category are close to zero. The polar bear is the largest land predator on the planet. It is invisible on thermal cameras. It can smell you through ice. It swims ocean distances that would challenge a boat. And it sees every human it encounters as exactly one thing. But the polar bear shares its genetic lineage, its deep evolutionary ancestry, with another bear. One that doesn't live on ice, one that doesn't need the ocean, one that roams the forests and mountains of the American mainland with a set of physical capabilities so excessive, so disproportionate to anything else in the ecosystem, that its very name, assigned by the scientists who first studied it, is a warning. Grizzly bear horribilis. That's the subspecies name. Ursus arctos horribilis. The scientists who classified the grizzly bear in the 19th century didn't reach for something neutral. They didn't use a geographic descriptor or a color reference, or a Latin term for large. They looked at the animal, reviewed the accounts, examined the remains of what it had done, and they wrote down horribilis. Horrible. It's one of the only times in taxonomic history that a scientific name functions as a direct, unfiltered editorial opinion. And after 2 centuries of additional data, no one has suggested changing it. The grizzly bear is the apex predator of the North American continent, not because it's the most venomous or the most precise or the most strategically sophisticated, but because it is the single most physically overpowering land animal in the Western Hemisphere, and its behavioral response to threat, competition, or hunger is not negotiation, it's escalation. Here are the numbers. Bite force, 1,160 psi. That's enough to collapse a bowling ball. Enough to puncture a Kevlar helmet. enough to close around a human skull and compress it the way your hand compresses a paper cup. Running speed, 56 kilometers per hour. At full sprint, a grizzly bear is faster than Usain Bolt has ever been at any point in any race he's ever run, and the bear weighs 400 kilograms. It runs at this speed uphill, downhill, and across broken terrain with no loss of pace. The myth that you can escape a grizzly by running downhill is exactly that, a myth. The bear doesn't care about the slope. Claws 10 centimeters long, blunt, curved, and hard as compacted calcium. Not designed for slicing like a cat's claws, but for digging. For tearing open rotting logs. For excavating ground squirrel burrows through frozen soil. And, when applied to flesh, for raking open wounds so deep that the damage extends to the structural layer of bone. The shoulder hump, that distinctive mound of muscle that gives the grizzly its silhouette, is not fat. It's an anchor, a massive concentration of muscle fiber attached directly to the scapulae and spine, powering the forelimbs with a force that allows the bear to flip boulders weighing hundreds of kilograms, uproot mature trees, and deliver a single four-leg strike capable of collapsing the ribcage of an adult elk. A single strike. The grizzly does not hunt with finesse. It does not target the throat for a clean finish. It does not use venom or constriction or drowning. When a grizzly bear engages, whether it's a rival male, a wolf pack contesting a carcass, or a human who made the wrong decision on a trail, it uses overwhelming, sustained physical force. It pins the target under its weight. It bites repeatedly, skull, spine, torso. It rakes with both forepaws simultaneously. And it does not stop because the target has stopped resisting. It stops when it decides to stop. In the autumn, the period biologists call hyperphagia, grizzlies enter a metabolic frenzy, consuming up to 20,000 calories per day to build the fat reserves that will sustain them through 7 months of hibernation. During this period, their aggression over food sources reaches its peak. They will displace entire wolf packs from fresh prey. They will confront other bears in encounters that leave both animals with torn ears, broken teeth, and deep lacerations. And they will treat any perceived threat to their caloric intake with a disproportionate and immediate response. It was during this exact period, late autumn, pre-hibernation, food scarce, that the most well-documented human-bear encounter in American history took place. Timothy Treadwell was a self-taught bear enthusiast who spent 13 consecutive summers living among the grizzly bears of Katmai National Park in Alaska. He camped in their territory, filmed them at close range, and believed, genuinely and vocally, that he had built a mutual understanding with the bears. For over a decade, his approach appeared to work. The bears tolerated him. He gave them names. He narrated their lives on camera. In October 2003, at the very end of the season, Treadwell and his companion Amy Huguenard were still in the field. Most of the bears they knew had already moved to hibernation sites. The salmon runs were finished. The few bears still active were the ones that hadn't eaten enough. Older animals, desperate animals, bears that were running out of time before winter. One of those bears came to the camp. The camera in the tent was running, but the lens cap was on. What was captured was audio only, 6 minutes of audio. The contents of that recording have never been publicly released. Treadwell's family and the authorities who reviewed it agreed it should remain private. But the people who have heard it, the coroner, the state troopers, the park rangers who recovered the scene, have described it in enough detail to confirm what the physical evidence already showed. The bear that entered the camp was not bluffing, was not defending territory, and was not startled. It was in the final, desperate stage of pre-hibernation caloric acquisition, and it treated the encounter as exactly what it was, a feeding opportunity. Neither Treadwell nor Huguenard survived the night. The case became the defining cautionary account in the relationship between humans and grizzly bears. Not because Treadwell was reckless, though many argued he was, but because it demonstrated with unambiguous finality that 13 years of proximity does not equal safety. The bear that ended it wasn't one of the bears he knew. It was a stranger. An old male, underweight with worn teeth, a bear that had no history with Treadwell, no relationship, no context. Just hunger and opportunity and 400 kilograms of horribilis. Now, after all of that, the grizzly does something every winter that is almost impossible to reconcile with the animal described above. It goes to sleep. For up to 7 months, the grizzly enters a state of hibernation so deep and so metabolically efficient that it borders on biological engineering. Its heart rate drops from roughly 40 beats per minute to as low as 8. Its body temperature decreases, but not as dramatically as smaller hibernators. It maintains enough warmth to wake and respond to threats within minutes if disturbed. During those 7 months, the bear does not eat. It does not drink. And, here's the detail, it does not urinate. Not once. The kidneys continue to function at reduced rate, but instead of excreting waste, the body reabsorbs the urea and converts it into usable amino acids. The bear literally recycles its own metabolic waste into protein, using it to maintain muscle mass while lying motionless in a den for more than half the year. The waste that cannot be recycled compacts in the lower intestine, forming a hardened mass called a fecal plug, a dense, compacted block that seals the colon for the duration of hibernation and is expelled, unceremoniously, the first time the bear defecates after emerging in the spring. 7 months of sleep, 0 food, 0 water, 0 bathroom breaks, its own urine converted into muscle fuel. And when it finally walks out of that den in April or May, thinner, slower, blinking in the light, it is still, pound for pound, the most powerful animal on the continent. And within weeks, the cycle starts again. That's the grizzly bear, Ursus arctos horribilis, the name that speaks for itself,